want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey folks, I'm Rick Wilson and welcome back to the Enemies List. Traveling today on Friday, and so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what just happened the week before. This episode will drop on Monday, so there may be more craziness over the weekend, but as of right now, there's one word you should have in your mind, and it's guilty. Guilty as charged. Guilty as hell. Guilty as sin. Guilty on every damn charge in the case. And that's Donald Trump. A jury of Trump's peers in New York City delivered a verdict that people were stunned by. And the verdict in the Stormy Daniels fraud, payoff, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it. It's got a lot of different names now. It's sort of a crime gumbo at this point. That verdict stunned a lot of people because a lot of Americans in the media, a lot of people in the press, a lot of people in politics have this belief about Trump that he's invulnerable. That nothing ever takes him down, that nothing ever gets to him, that nothing ever puts him back on his heels. And this verdict did that. This verdict was something that finally lets us use some words about Donald Trump that we've always known to be true, but now we can say them with absolute confidence. Guilty, felon, criminal. And we can say them almost breezily now because Donald Trump is a criminal. He is a felon. He is a man now permanently marked with the shame of a criminal conviction. And I want to say this about Trump that is important to understand. This is a guy who, when the Central Park Five were falsely accused of raping a woman, called for the death penalty. This is a guy who's over and over again said, if you don't testify in your own trial and you invoke the Fifth Amendment, you must be a criminal. This is a guy who in 2016 made the core of his campaign a single phrase, lock her up, because Hillary Clinton had a private email server. And so being able to call him those things accurately and correctly and fully, for me at least, and I think for millions of Americans, it's a very satisfying feeling. It's a very good feeling to finally have this situation where you don't feel like Trump is inevitable. Greg Sargent wrote a fantastic piece in the New Republic on Friday, and it talked about why this case was so devastating for Trump. It's because he has always had the aura of invincibility. That aura is gone. It is now broken. He's not invincible. So, we're going to end up with a guy now who, once he's convicted and sentenced, will not be able to cast a ballot for himself. He won't be able to if the felony applies in Florida as well. I think there's reciprocity. He won't be able to vote, own a gun, travel to many countries because he won't have the ability to use a passport in the same way that a normal person who's not a felon would. He's going to face actual penalties now. Now, will he go to jail? We do not know. Okay, we don't know that answer. It is a mystery still as to what the sentencing will be like. But his behavior on Friday, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, I think is going to make it much harder to give him a lenient sentence. Because what does a judge want to see with somebody, even somebody who doesn't have a criminal conviction beforehand? They want to see someone who's willing to make amends. They want to see someone who recognizes what they've done. They want to see someone who is willing to say, I have sinned, forgive me, and I will go away and sin no more. He's not that guy. Now, make no mistake about this, folks. Trump is one of the most successful criminals in American history. He is the architect and beneficiary of this bewildering constellation of these scams, these grifts, these frauds, these con games, bust out, ripoffs, all this flim-flam around this guy for decades. He inherited a weird, sleazy con game op from his dad. And then he spent the last 50 years engaged in the most low and reprehensible behavior. He has ripped off his vendors over and over again. He's stolen money from people over and over again. He's ripped off people who were credulous enough to believe in Trump University or Trump vitamins or Trump steaks or whatever it was. Okay. His name and his brand was saved by The Apprentice, which is another story from this week, where the use of the N-word, and I don't mean Negro, I mean the other N-word with a hard R on the end, during The Apprentice, has become a massive blow up, massive controversy, because those tapes do exist. Turns out they're not apocryphal after all. And this is a guy who, for all of his tough guy act in the courtroom, for all of his Billy Badass and all this trying to intimidate the judge and the jurors and the system and the court staff and everybody else and Alvin Bragg and everyone else in the process, his act in court turned out to be a complete failure. The 12 members of that jury, if they were moved by his contemptuous, I'm going to take a nap, I'm going to talk shit attitude, if they were moved by it, they were moved in the opposite direction, because they found unanimously on 34 counts, 34 felony counts in this case. And I will say, Donald Trump has a few obsessions. He loves the New York Times. He loves the Drudge Report. He loves the idea of seeing his name in print. He did not love so much seeing the word guilty 34 times under his photo in court on the front page of the Drudge Report. He did not enjoy seeing the New York Times with the words guilty and a 2/3 page spread of Trump's picture, again, looking beat down, worn down. And even in the New York Post, the sense that he was railroaded still didn't eliminate or erase the coverage that he's guilty. Even in Rupert Murdoch's pet paper, it didn't erase the fact that Trump is guilty. So, the stories that we've heard for years about Trump, okay, that he ripped off his contractors, his vendors, his clients, that he all these deals, all these bad debts, all this suing back and forth of people on the civil front. He hid behind lawyers for so long, but when he tried to be his own lawyer in this case, when he tried to tell Todd Blanche how to prosecute Stormy Daniels, how to prosecute Michael Cohen, when he did those things, it turns out, much like, fool for a client rule, well, Donald Trump had a fool for a client, and it was Donald Trump. So all these things came home to roost in this moment, and I think that's why Americans feel so strongly about this, so emotional about it. He finally got caught. And I was pondering the question the other day of thieves who get away with the criminal life over time. And some do, some get away with stuff. Some, they disappear. They somehow manage it. They don't live extravagant lives. They don't buy the proverbial pink Cadillac after the Lufthansa heist. They live quietly. And look, so I'm going to confess, I have certain intellectual rabbit holes that I will go down in my life. Okay. And one of them I'm really fascinated about is life in 18th century England. And I'm fascinated by it in its highs and its lows, in its glory and its filth. And so one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the sort of London underground, the demi-monde of London of the time, with highwaymen and thieves and thief takers and fences and whores and madams and projectors, as they call them, housebreakers, swindlers, all these characters, flash mobs, forgers, all these fascinating characters, right? And in this window where you have the Enlightenment, where you have this unbelievable upwelling, as Neil Stephenson calls it, the upwelling of the quicksilver of the mind that happened in the sort of after the Great Fire of London in 1666, you suddenly had the emergence of Hook and Newton and all these and Pepys and all these amazing characters. But you also had these amazing thieves. You also had these really colorful, amazing people. And one guy I'm fascinated with is a character named Jack Shepherd. Now, Jack Shepherd was born in a part of London called Stepney, which at the time was pretty rough. And if you made it to be 10 years old in Stepney, that was kind of a miracle. You were, by definition, really tough. So this guy, Jack Shepherd, he was apprenticed initially, but he became a thief. He was a carpenter initially, but he became a thief. An incredibly successful thief. And he had the guy was a folk hero type. And there were a few other thieves in that era, like John Wilde and others that were sort of the same way. He becomes this folk hero, and he becomes famous not only for getting away with it, but for getting caught and getting put in prison and then escaping and going back to doing exactly what he did before. And so this really reminded me of Trump the other day. But eventually, Jack Shepherd was caught. And the thing that he knew, if he was caught, he was going to be taken to Tyburn Cross in London and hanged from what they called the Triple Tree. It was a big wooden structure where they had a bunch of, nooses hanging down. He would be taken there and kicked off of a cart by Jack Ketch, who was the executioner of London. And he would fall to his death, and the rope would snap his neck, and he would die. But Jack Shepherd, in his closing days of life, was not fascinated by what was to come. He was not looking forward at why he had been, about what was about to happen to him. It's the worst thing possible, right? He had no hope of escape at this point. They really barred him in tightly. But he was fascinated by the fact that he never got caught. He wanted to know what was taking them so long. Why had he never gotten caught? And I think Trump is a lot like that. He got away with everything forever and ever and ever. And when he finally got caught in this case, it was so shocking to him. I think he's had an emotional break in this case. I think he's had a really deep and dark moment of anxiety and fear for the first time, that he's going to be a felon. He's going to be a criminal for the rest of his life. He never gets to wash that stain away. Even if he serves his time or pays his penalty or does his house arrest, I don't think he's going to prison, folks, sadly to say. But I think this has been a very bad time because he never really believed at the end that he wouldn't get caught. I think he knew sometime, somewhere, somebody would get to him. It's part of the guilt of this weird relationship with his dad, Fred, and his mother, Mary, and all this screwed up, like lab rat upbringing that was so dark and weird and strange about the guy. But look, you're going to see everybody in Trump's elected army of acolytes and worshipers and followers and fanboys. They're going to come out and say, "Oh, Joe Biden secretly masterminded this," and they have been all day on Friday, all day on Thursday. They are all trying to make this into some sort of dark conspiracy led by Joe Biden. That aura of selective omnipotence that they want to believe about Biden. Either he's a drooling, senile old fool, or he's a criminal mastermind after Donald Trump. Which one is it, guys? Just pick one. But Biden has done very well on this. He has kept his mouth shut till the end. He's basically said, "Are you going to elect a felon? Are you going to elect a guy who is a criminal?" And look, for the answer for a lot of MAGAs, it's yes. Trump raised $34 million last night, which I believe it. I also believe that that's basically 5 weeks of his lawyer fees, and they'll burn through it all. You don't get to play this every single time. You don't get to play this every single moment. But I want to say one more thing about the MAGA folks that are doing this. They all know they're lying. Every single one of them knows it's a lie. Every single one of them knows it's a ridiculous lie. Every single one of them, if I hooked them up to jumper cables or shot them up with truth serum or scanned their brains somehow, every one of them knows they're lying. And I mean all of them. Marjorie Taylor Greene knows. Matt Gaetz knows. Mike Lee knows. J.D. Vance knows. By the way, J.D. Vance's eye makeup was fabulous on Fox today. That crease was sharp, buddy. It was sharp. It looked great. Do that more. Fabulous. But in all of this, no one in Trump's universe, in Trump's mind, can defend himself like he can. So, of course, what did he do? On Friday, he announces at 11 o'clock, he's going to have a press conference at Trump Tower. Now, definitionally, a press conference is where you answer questions from reporters, but Chicken Donnie would not. He did, however, go out there And this whole thing, the video ran for like 55 minutes. And Trump was completely unhinged, completely melting down from the moment he walked out there. I mean, guys, this speech, he felt the need to go out and shore up his ego and his image, but he walked out there and gave the most bizarro world, discursive, random, weird speech that will go down in the annals of American political rhetoric as a 0 of 5 stars flop. This is like Francis Mullman coming to speak at a PETA convention. This is like Ron DeSantis going to Wigstock. This is like Steve Bannon at the annual meeting of the American Dermatology Association. It made no sense. He looked unbelievably awful. His wig was crooked. His entire affect was strange. He looked so low energy. He was slumping. The guy was not the Donald Trump that came down that escalator in 2015. Okay. His makeup was greasy. He looked god awful. There are pictures of this in my Substack. You can find them out there online. This guy looked like he had been run over by a bus called Adderall. Okay. It was bad. He looked unwell. And I joked today that he looked like a guy who woke up in a flophouse room somewhere covered in blood, with the body of a dead hooker and a live monkey in the room, and no memory of what happened. This guy was broken. He was defeated. And he stood by that podium and he had none of his swagger. He had none of his heat, none of his energy. He was tired. He was worn out. And he was as worn out as Trump Tower is. And if you ever go to Trump Tower, it's not fancy. It's not nice. It's not posh. It's not rich. It's not beautiful anymore. It looks old and broken down and run down inside. And it sort of was like, Sauron in The Ring. The tower was always the source of Trump's mental strength in some ways. He had this one thing that was his central accomplishment. It's worn down. It's worn out. He's worn out. I mean, honestly, it was painful to watch. He rambled and mumbled. He went into all these box canyons of these weird anecdotes and stories and made up imaginary characters. And he went through it and busted the whole gag order. Okay. He went through the whole thing and blew through the gag order, talking about Michael Cohen, talking about Weisselberg, the entire thing. I mean, if you think that Trump was doing himself a good turn on this, au contraire, my friends, this guy was making his legal problems worse. He's admitting things in this conversation that now will be brought up in the sentencing hearings. He's talking about things that will now be brought up again when the judge has to review Trump's compliance with the gag order. He made it more likely. I think he has some sort of like politically suicidal ideation about blowing himself up now. This was really an ugly and strange moment for him. And, look, the MAGA base thinks that he's strong and commanding and forceful. But what you saw there today was a broken moral pygmy on the stage. You saw today a guy whose brain does not work like it did 2 years ago or 4 years ago, and certainly not like it worked in 2016. It felt weird and sad and desperate, and it felt like he was just fumbling. And the other part of this I found strange. What did you see during the trial? This flood of these MAGA representatives and senators and governors and political figures and media figures all showing up, blue suit, white shirt, red tie. You didn't see anybody there today with him. He could have stacked people behind him on that podium. He didn't. He chose not to, or they chose not to. I don't know where that is yet, but it was a massive, massive mistake. I mean, look, this guy was out defending himself today, and it was tiresome, and it was boring, and it wasn't exciting, and it wasn't clear, and it wasn't helpful. Donald Trump, and again, I mentioned Greg Sargent's article in the New Republic earlier. Donald Trump forever had an aura of invincibility, that he'll get away with everything. He'll get away with murder. Shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. They let you do it. But in the end, this time, when you're a juror, they let you do it. And that is to convict Donald Trump. That is to sentence Donald Trump as a felon in 34 separate counts. And on July 11th, Donald Trump will face the judge one more time. He will be sentenced for these 34 crimes. Will he appeal? Certainly. I'm not sure Donald Trump knows what he's about to the buzzsaw he's about to run into on the Court of Appeals. But I can tell you, just as he used the N-word to refer to a candidate on The Apprentice, he'll be using the N-word to refer to the 5 African-American women who make up the appeals court that he's about to push his case up to. It did not help him today. I don't think anything he's done has helped him today. I think we are in a moment where Donald Trump, while he can still win this election, while he can still get out there and cause endless chaos, while he can still break this country in a million ways, if I may go back and quote the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Predator, if it bleeds, we can kill it. And what you saw today was a creature on that stage who has been wounded, who is bleeding, and now it's time for us to politically kill it.
Hey, look, Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida, who's handling the classified documents case in which Donald Trump stole and illegally retained and illegally exposed to people a variety of secret and top secret and code word classified documents, continues to display that she is completely unsuitable to be on the federal bench. She is playing this game so unbelievably obviously and grotesquely that I find it difficult to imagine anybody would not put her on the enemies list.